All right, folks, here we go again, moving on along in the time of coronavirus. Just a few remarks here about chapter 2 of the Zhuangzi. Um, yeah, it's a really fascinating chapter, but also a really, really difficult chapter. And as I emphasize in the handout, I really want us to focus on just a couple of key points. There's so much here. It's such a rich, rich, rich text. And I really want to encourage folks to invest themselves in the text, not just for this class, but also going forward. Really is a text that rewards repeated readings. I mean, there's never a point in which you're done reading the Zhuangzi, which is very much in line with the content of the text, right? Because our views and opinions, how we see things are always changing. And so whenever we return to the Zhuangzi and read it, we are ourselves different, and the text thus becomes different too as we respond to it differently over time. But let's see, a couple things. I really want to emphasize that you'll see the phrase or the word "the course" repeated again and again in the text. And as I've encouraged you to do, please do read the entry in the glossary on Dao, D-A-O, right? Because when our translator comes across that term, Dao, in the Chinese, he translates it usually as the course. There's one place, I think, where he translates it as the great clump. And it's, anyway. So please do look at that, right? And then, so the two main things, I guess we call them things that I want you to focus on or really try to latch onto in this chapter are this notion that comes up again and again, as I've tried to indicate on the handout as well, namely the phrase, the rightness of the present this, on the one hand, and then the other phrase, the illumination of the obvious, on the other. And I want to say just a couple of words about each of those. So this notion of the rightness of the present this, that way of talking about it is new in this chapter, but we've seen this idea in the very first chapter and really in Autumn Floods as well. And so in the first chapter, right, this idea of, which I've come back to again a number of times, and so again, it's on page, bottom page 5, going over to 6. But suppose you were to chariot upon what is true both to heaven and earth, riding atop the back and forth of the 6 atmospheric breaths, so that your wandering could nowhere be brought to a halt, right? So again, this idea of being able to go through life, wandering at ease, right, unfettered, not being held back by our perspectives, the limitations on our perspectives, our judgments, all these sorts of things that can fetter us, as we've talked about again and again. So now, in chapter 2, this idea is being referred to as going by the rightness of the present this. So one perhaps concrete example, again, appealing to our present situation, the coronavirus. So, of course, our class was focused on, or not focused on, but was organized around, Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday class meetings, meet for an hour and 15 minutes. There might be, out-of-class assignments and so forth, but a lot of the work was being done in the classroom. And so now, though, we're stuck at home. And so what do we do? What's the right thing to do? Should we press on and try to make everyone meet at those same class times online using some product like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, Skype, or whatever? Or does the present this require a different response? Is the right thing to do now not what it was then when we could actually meet in person? And so, of course not, right? So we've not tried to make everyone meet at the same time, in part because of issues with connectivity, access to the internet, and so, made changes. And so as I said, our learning, so to speak, is organized around the week, not the class period. We're not meeting all at the same time. I'm trying to minimize the amount of stuff you have to do online because of connectivity issues. And so we might call this, going by the rightness of the present this, trying to adjust to present situations, present circumstances. and not in the sort of other part of that, right, is not bemoaning that fact, right, not lamenting like, oh, this is so terrible, this is so terrible, but rather, okay, this is how things are, we just got to deal with it, and it's going to change, right, it's not going to stay the same. Okay, that's, a general sort of idea with the rightness of the present. This, going with not just the flow, but just adapting and understanding what was right before may no longer be right now. So the other, again, the other phrase that I want to look at is the illumination of the obvious. So again, the glossary here is super helpful. So I'm turning to pages 217 to 18, where the Chinese is Yi Ming, and Tziporin is translating that as, again, illumination of the obvious. So the part that I want to focus on here briefly is on page 218. So maybe, I don't know, third of the way down on the page. And Tziporin writes, in regard to this phrase, the illumination of the obvious, some take the term, as used at crucial junctures in chapter 2, which of course is our chapter now, of this work, to indicate a higher, perhaps intuitive type of understanding, which transcends the relativism of perspectival rights and wrongs, a quote-unquote great knowledge, somewhat similar to Buddhist enlightenment. Right, so the idea with Buddhist enlightenment, right, one way of thinking about it is that you practice Buddhism, and at some point you have this aha moment, or you achieve this perspective that is enlightened, and you're able to understand reality as it really is, right? That's one way of thinking about enlightenment in Buddhism. And Tziporin is saying, some people try to understand the illumination of the obvious as this sort of achieved state of supreme understanding. But he goes on, but this seems to be inconsistent with Zhuangzi's relativist critiques, which must then be regarded as merely therapeutic and provisional. Right, so Zhuangzi is insisting that everything is perspectival, there is no ultimate perspective. All of our judgments and values and so forth are relative to our perspectives. And this is something we have to take very seriously. So this poem continues, so understanding this term, the illumination of the obvious, in its more basic sense of obvious, resolves this tension. It then refers not to a deeper apprehension of the real, transcendental truth lying beneath the surface of appearances, but rather to attentiveness to the surface itself, the most obvious and undeniable feature of which is the disagreement between varying perspectives and their transformations. Right? So what's obvious, right, is that everyone's contending from their own perspective, everyone's asserting their own point of view. But not only that, right? Not only are we limited by our perspectives, not only does each person have their own perspectives, but those perspectives themselves transform over time, right? What we think now is not what we think tomorrow or what we thought yesterday. Our views change in subtle and gross ways. As such, the point again, so as such, it is related to other distinctive and seemingly paradoxical phrases in chapter 2, notably the shadowy splendor at 237, and the radiance of drift and doubt. So drift and doubt are precisely what is obvious, right? And the radiance and illumination provided by this resolves the problems they seem to present. That is, the uncertainty of multi-perspectivism. Okay, so this phrase drift and doubt is a lovely one, the radiance of drift and doubt, right? It's sort of contradictory in itself, right? So radiance implies some sort of brightness, some sort of clarity, and drift and doubt sort of go the other direction with that, right? So, but exactly what is radiant, right, is that our perspectives drift, so to speak, right, in various ways that we don't ourselves realize. They drift here and there, they change, right? And we are full of doubt, full of uncertainty, and that is where we are, right? And that's not a position that's going to be transcended. So there is no ultimate perspective here, right? And so this is sort of paradoxical, sort of like saying, if someone says there is no truth, well, one obvious question is, well, is that true? Right? Because if it is true, then it undermines the point. And so similarly, right, Zhuangzi can't say, look, there's no escaping our perspectives. But that, of course, is Zhuangzi's perspective on things. And so there's all kinds of logical difficulties here. But so what he seems to be suggesting is, look, the ultimate perspective is there is no ultimate perspective. All we have are our perspectives. But he is not able to say that so directly, but rather is trying to indicate this rather indirectly with the various stories and so forth that we find in the Zhuangzi. Okay, so that's really incomplete, and I wish we had more time together that we could talk about this in person. So I do encourage you, right, to send me questions if you have them. The last thing I want to say in this video, it's gotten longer than I was wanting it to be, is that I really want to encourage folks, you know, if you really, really want to get into this text, and I know that you have a lot going on now, this is a very stressful time, and so it's nothing you have to do, but again, if you're I don't know, moved by the text, and really want to get deeper into it, one lovely thing about this translation that we're using is that starting on page, where are we here, 129, Zipporah has also translated a large number of sections from the traditional commentaries on the inner chapters. So the inner chapters are 1 through, what is it, 7, I think. And so, yeah, 1 through 7. And so if you turn to page 129, for example, we have a paragraph from Guo Xiang, and next to that you have a 1:1, right? So what that's referring to is that paragraph from Guo Xiang, that pronunciation, corresponds to paragraph 1:1, which if you turn to page, where are we here? It's the very first paragraph in the whole thing, which is on page, can't get there, on page 3, right? So that's the opening of, it's the first paragraph of chapter 1. And so that's what's going on there. Those marginal numbers are referring to chapters and paragraphs, right? So 1:2 is chapter 1, paragraph 2, and so forth and so on to the commentary. And so the commentaries themselves are difficult, but at the same time, the more you get into the text, the more you linger, the more you sort of drift around in it, so to speak, the more you wander around in it, so to speak, to use Zhuangzian terms here, the more at home you'll be in it, and the more sense it'll make. And so I really want to encourage you to take advantage of that resource. So, okay, so there's going to be another video where I talk about the important section 3 in the morning. So take a look at that as well, folks. All right, take care.